How's it going, YouTube? Bridget7298 here, and today I'm adding on to my advanced spawn system tutorial. This is part 2. As you can see, considering how my last tutorial was on this, you might see a few things that are different. I suggest you watch it before you continue with this tutorial. Um, if you want to follow along, download the actual GMX file from my previous tutorial, and then you can add on to it as I am right now. And if you follow along and actually type all this out, you will actually learn it a lot better. So what you're going to do here is create a sprite player. That's the first thing that you need to do. That wasn't in my previous tutorial just because that was part 1, obviously. So create your sprite player, and then also make an object for it. I just called object player. If you want to name it that, that would probably be the best, just so you can follow along. As soon as you create the object player, you need to make a step event here, and drag the code, execute a piece of code, and just put this in there. Feel free to pause the video and type this. But this is just saying, you know, like if you push the left arrow key, you know, your player's gonna move to the left and to the right, up and down, you know, all that stuff. Once you do that, simply place your player in the room here, and that should be finished. Now, one thing that my last tutorial didn't have that we need to make a few changes is the enemies were actually following the mouse rather than the player. So to change that, it's really simple. Go into the object enemy and go into the step event, and where this MP potential step is, right here it said mouse underscore X. Just replace that with object player dot X and object player dot Y, and now the enemies will follow the player. And what I'm going to show you today is how to make your enemies spawn randomly at certain points, and also how to make them spawn depending on how close you are to the spawn point. So you're making a zombie survival game, and all of a sudden you see a window way off in the distance. Well, maybe zombies won't spawn there unless you're close enough to it. You know, that's kind of basically how, if you've ever played, you know, zombie survival games, they're usually made to where they don't have objects spawning unless the player is in a somewhat reasonable distance within that spawn point, because otherwise that would be pointless. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. It's pretty simple. So we're going to go into this object spawn point here, and if you remember in our create event here, you know, we still have the image speed equals 0. We're setting the alarm to 40. We're actually going to go into alarm 0 here in this execute piece of code here. So in alarm 0, that's where the spawning's taking place. The first thing I'm going to show you is in this first case 0, which is image index 0, which is the top left. That would be this guy right here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, if you remember from my last tutorial. To make them spawn randomly, you actually do if I random 50 is less or equal to 10, and we're going to close the bracket, and I'll explain basically what this iRandom does. The best way to picture this is iRandom. Think of iRandom as a dice. Now, whatever you put inside here is how many sides the dice is going to have. So in this case, iRandom is a 50-sided dice. And what it's saying is, it's the alarm is going to go off, and for image index for the case 0 here, so once the alarm goes off, it's going to roll the dice. Okay, if the dice equals 10 or anything less than 10, then it will create the instance of an object enemy. Otherwise, it won't create it, and you'll have to wait till the alarm goes off again, and then it will decide you know, if the number is 10 or lower for it to spawn. So that's just rolling a dice. If it's 10 or less, it'll spawn, otherwise it won't. Pretty basic. Now I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to show you that thing I was telling you about how, depending on how close you are to the spawn point, will make the enemy spawn, which is also very easy. There's two different codes you can use. I prefer to use this one, but you do if distance, distance to point object player dot x object player dot y, and we're gonna do less than 100. Alright, so let me explain how this works. Okay, so basically when you do distance to point, that's basically what this is saying is that well, first of all, the object spawn point is the object that we're typing this code in. So when we do distance to point, it's asking us for basically 3 variables, I would say. Technically 3, but anyway, so basically it's saying, you know, well, if distance to point blank blank blank, like what do you want us to distance to point? Well, basically it's saying, okay, so the distance to point from the object spawn point to object player.x and y. So it's basically in more simple terms, it's saying, you know, the distance from the spawn point to the player, if it's less than 100 pixels, then it'll create an object enemy, otherwise it won't. Now, the pixels that it chooses are depending on how you have your collision masks set up, I guess you could say. So let's say your sprite, or the player sprite, is a circle. So if the bounding box of the circle is 16 pixels, then when your player, I don't really know how to explain that. Just if you had a player that was 100 pixels by 100 pixels, you know, the closer you get, I mean, you wouldn't have to be very close for it to spawn because of the pixel size of your sprite. I don't know if that makes sense, but you'll see what I mean. So yeah, this is pretty easy. And one other thing I forgot to put back down here is you gotta keep your alarm 0 and set it back to whatever you want. I'm just gonna keep it at 45. Anyway, so let me just show you what we got going on here. The top one here, roll the dice. If it's 10 or less, create an object enemy at the first spawn point. At the second spawn point, if the player is 100 pixels or closer, basically, to the second spawn point, then create the enemy. And these two are just randomly spawning, you know, normally. The 2 bottom spawn points, those ones will just keep spawning normally. And let me show you what that looks like really quick here. So we're gonna run the game, and you'll see the first spawn point, it will randomly have enemies coming out. The 2 bottom ones, as usual, still have enemies spawning. Oh, see, the first one finally did have one come out. And if you notice, there's not any coming out from this pink one up here. There are none coming out, and you know why? Because I'm not close enough to it. Now before I get into that, I'm going to go back into this, and I am just going to simply comment these lines out here. Okay, so that just means that I'm just temporarily disabling that piece of the code. Okay, so basically all we have going right now is the first 2 spawn points. I'm going to show you. Alright, so if my player just sits here, these 2 up here are the only active ones, and this one's random, this one is based on distance. So as you can see, it's rolling a dice every 45 steps. Or, well, I don't know exactly what it is for an alarm, but it's basically checking every, I want to say like every second and a half or so it's checking. So as you can see, they're not coming out really consistent, you know. They might have a few bursts where, you know, 2 or 3 are coming out pretty quickly, but now I'm going to show you, when I get close to this pink one here, another one's actually going to spawn out of there. See, I got closer, all of a sudden they're spawning, but then I go way over here, they're not spawning there anymore. And that, my friends, is basically another add-on to the spawning system.
Run.